all doing? I'm excited to be here. I've been here for a couple days, and I came here with my 25-minute talk, and I've accumulated 2 others along the way. So I'm going to squeeze 3 25-minute talks into this 25-minute segment, and I want to thank you in advance for giving me your attention. I mean, you may not know this, but that's the most expensive gift that a human can give to another. We are wired biologically to conserve our attention for the threat that has not yet emerged. And then we've been conditioned over the past decade by these devices that we cling to actually distract us even more. So thank you in advance for 25 minutes of attention. The assignment that Brian gave me is talking about transforming financial management, right? Right after lunch on the 3rd day, and I already knew coming in I had to prevent the food coma for the next round of speakers, so I'm taking on that assignment. But I also learned over the last couple days, first of all, I got to rehab Aristotle, so I'm going to try to do that today. I've got to reposition Sisyphus as actually something more inspiring, so I'm going to bring Plato in to help us do that. I've got to introduce Rousseau, because he's very critically important to rehabilitating Aristotle, and I'm going to talk about transforming financial management. So you all up for that? This is going to be an interesting tour. Okay. And then before I do that, I got to deal with 2 elephants in the room. One we've glanced at. We glanced at one of the elephants in the room this morning when Brian's opening. And that elephant is the elephant that has turned into Sisyphus. But I'm going to rehabilitate that as a quest for enlightenment. That elephant is hey, we've all been talking about the same things for a long time, and it feels like we're losing. Is that in fact true? It's not true, but I know why it feels that way, and hopefully I'll give you some new tools to deal with that. That's the first elephant in the room. The second elephant we haven't glanced at yet, but I think you'll understand it. And I'm not going to seek your permission, but I'm going to give you the warning that I have to talk about stupid people. And I want to talk about stupid people in a very precise way. There's a book, it's a short book, it's like 60 pages. It was written in the late 1970s by an Italian philosopher named Carlo Cipollone. Only recently translated into English. I don't know why it has eluded translation. It's called The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. Has anyone read it? Okay, you all got to read it. Like, take all of Brian's recommendations, push them down on the stack 1, put at the top Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. When I talk about stupid people, so I'm going to talk about stupid people throughout the duration of these 25 minutes, I'm talking very precisely in Carlo's language. Carlo defines that there are 4 kinds of people. And the first kind that he defines are stupid people. And stupid people, by definition, do 2 things. They cause harm or loss to others while getting nothing for themselves. They cause harm or loss to others while doing nothing for themselves. And we pervasively underestimate the presence of those stupid people in our midst. The other 3 types of people are bandits. Bandits create good income, other things for themselves while taking from others. The helpless create good for others while harming themselves. Those are often people who get stuck in, really bad roles. And then the intelligent create good for themselves and for others. And societies and companies that thrive, the intelligent figure out how to keep the stupid at bay. Unfortunately, in this battle, why are we all feeling like this might be a loss? We're feeling like this might be a losing cause because we are caught up in forces that Aristotle actually wrote about over 2,000 years ago. Now, these are the forces of hierarchy, the forces of essentially subjugating the helpless at the bottom of a pyramid that often the folks at the top, if the intelligent aren't doing their jobs right, the folks at the top end up being bandits. And Aristotle, he was a professional observer, and he observed that that's just the way things are. There are people at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're just destined to be there. And there are people at the top, and they're just destined to be there. But along comes Rousseau right around the time that the United States is being born and says, Aristotle had an accurate observation, but he mistook cause for effect. And Rousseau's famous line is, People everywhere are born free, yet they're in chains. And that this subjugation to hierarchy is in fact self-inflicted and simply requires courage to overcome it. Both of these things I just talked about are 25-minute talks in and of themselves, so I'm only planting those seeds. I'll come back at the end and bring Plato in and bring some hope. But against that context, and the reason that understanding stupid people is important is in the battle between these forces of hierarchy and these forces of freedom, which we often talk about in terms of collaboration, right? We are trying to empower more people to participate in creating good outcomes because we all have the experience and the belief, and that belief is reinforced by experience, that when we allow more people to participate in creating good outcomes, you actually get better outcomes. When people are mostly subjugated to the decisions of others, it's kind of a random walk. If that person at the top of the hierarchy happens to be, in Chobani's view, an intelligent person, you might get good outcomes from time to time. But you durably get better outcomes when you resist hierarchy and foster collaboration, and that's what we're all trying to do. And there is a force, the stupid people, they prefer hierarchy. Because it's actually more comfortable to say, well, yeah, there were bad results, but it's not my fault. I'm at the bottom of this hierarchy. I don't have any agency in this. I'm largely helpless. Just pay me at the end of the day and let me go home. And so in this battle, where we might think that the forces could be like equivalently distributed between bandits, intelligent people, and the helpless, it turns out the stupid like to gravitate toward hierarchy. So how do we fight that? Well, we encounter that in financial management. Financial management has been talked about a couple times today, leads to certain behaviors if it's conducted certain ways. And most of us have been subject to the old ways. The old ways is sort of the inherited wisdom. Aristotle would come here and observe, yep, the way these finance organizations behave is exactly what I observed in 400 BC. There are people who are naturally suited to be leaders of resources and others who are naturally suited to be disposed of by others. And the way the old ways show up is the annual operating plan. The annual operating plan is an exercise in implementing hierarchy, driven, as Parker described and as others have described, not by merit in general, but by merit in salesmanship. The annual operating plan is usually the final stage of the project pageant. Right? Have you all participated in a project pageant? Like, this usually starts getting going. They dust off the floats. They dust off last year's floats in June or July. They start gearing up for the early competition of what slot are you going to get in the parade in August, September, and then you run the full-blown pageant at the end of the year, trying to get to an annual operating plan, which is which floats won the most money. And then, people become professionals at participating in the project pageant. Just like in beauty pageants, there are consultants, there's wardrobe research. It's all theater, and it results in establishment of the hierarchy for the next year. And the winners of the project pageant love certain elements of the old ways. They love this competition to potentially get a single yes that then turns into a fixed bid for implementing the promise of their float, a temporary team that might be assigned to that, and then we're off to the races. Release the hounds, don't pay any more attention to what I was supposed to accomplish. Just pay attention to, did I spend all the money, and did something come out that we can have a launch party for? But because organizations are skeptical of that, they also release the police. And the police are often the finance organization. The finance organization then gloms itself on to each of these things to ensure, first of all, that nobody's coloring outside the lines, right? That the pageant awardee is doing only what they were awarded to do, and that there's regular scrutiny of, is the money being spent at the right pace, and is this all gonna kind of track to a nice Gantt chart? Is this everyone's experience of the old ways? May in fact still be the current ways. That leads to a collection of problems that I think we've all experienced. You run the annual project pageant cycle reinforced by financial practices that are geared up to this annual cycle. Award budget, equip to that budget, execute that budget, rinse and repeat. But what that leads to is you run that cycle for 5, 6 years, let alone 10, 20, which is the situation many of us find ourselves in. You run that cycle over and over again, and you get what Angie Brown and I discussed yesterday. You get a massive amount of fragmentation because every pageant winner that comes along and needs to get their thing done, they build all of their own supporting cast. They not only they believe they don't have time to talk to anybody else who might be working on the same thing. They think all of those other people aren't going to do a good job. So they need to create all their own stuff. So if you're in an organization that does like maybe 10 things, you run the project pageant 10 or 15 times, and you get those 10 things re-implemented 10, 20 times. And so you get this systems infrastructure. We had someone up here earlier from the state of Pennsylvania, like, how many times do you think the state of Pennsylvania has implemented citizen identity? Like as many departments as they have their own concept of citizen identity, because that's the way the awards worked. That's the way the project pageant worked. No one wants their float to be evaluated in the context of the whole parade. They want their float to be evaluated all by itself. It leads to ignored opportunities because the police are around, and when the police are around and your award was to do a very specific thing, it's inevitable that you're going to stumble across an adjacent problem. It's inevitable you're going to be in a part of the code base that says, you know, this has always been a problem, and we're in here right now and we should probably fix it, and someone comes along and says, no, 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 no. You're not funded to fix that. So people put blinders on. The temporary team that was assembled to implement the vision of the float moves on. And there is this fixation not on return, not on outcome, not on getting results, but a fixation on completing the project, a fixation on, in fact, spending the investment. Right? I got the money, I should spend it. Because that burnishes my star in next year's pageant. I'm already a big winner. That helps me become a bigger winner. And at least among many of us, the reaction has to be the Festivus reaction. Is there anyone here celebrate Festivus? We just exited holiday season. You know, there are like 52 or 3 holidays celebrated between sort of the end of November and the beginning of January. Festivus is the newest one. Introduced in a famous Seinfeld episode by George Costanza's father, Frank Costanza, because he found himself experiencing his own version of this like incomprehension of the old ways when he was in the toy store and he and another dad were competing for the last unit on the shelf of a toy that they both wanted, and they ended up at fisticuffs. And Frank famously says, and as I was raining blows down on this other father, I realized there has to be a better way. And I think that's the result that most intelligent people come to in their own head after they've seen the results of the old ways of financial management. And much as was described in Lean Enterprise, that leads to, I think, a very straightforward recipe for, well, what is the goal of transforming financial management that would focus on better outcomes and would solve a bunch of the problems? It doesn't involve a poll. It doesn't involve feats of strength. It does involve a little bit of airing of grievances. Those are the fundamental elements of the Festivus celebration for anyone who's not following along. So the first of those is durable product funding. Angie and I succeeded at making that happen at Home Depot. I've seen mixed results in other places. This is a general good, even if you don't transform the entire financial management. If you start making headway to say, wait a minute, every float is built on a trailer that has wheels. We are not going to build 27 versions of trailers and wheels. We're going to have a trailers and wheels department. They're not going to worry about is their funding going to evaporate at the end of any calendar year. They know they're always going to be in business. And that means the trailers and wheels infrastructure is actually going to get a little bit better every year. And we're going to start approaching the beginning of Steve Spear's magic of half in and twice out, because we start consolidating investment into teams that are no longer temporary. They have some permanent attachment to this thing actually getting better. And the same thing happens as you move up the stack, right? We're going to invest in, at Home Depot, we did this on sort of the fundamental building blocks of a retailer. And this is what Angie talked about the common architecture. We're going to have one engine for looking up and passing back the price at which we should sell this item at this moment in time, instead of having 29 of them. The other pivot in financial management is to get the finance organization, because at the end of the day, the finance organization, they also actually want results. They do not relish their police role. They relish being able to tell a good return on investment story. The only way they've been allowed to do that is by attempting to police folks to have their actuals look something like the pro forma that won them the budget award in the first place. But they know that doesn't happen. And the thing that drives that often is a fixation among project sponsors on, if you just build me these capabilities, I promise you I'll go get better results. They rarely describe the mechanism by which those capabilities turn into results, and then the old ways drive a continued fixation on, have you built the widgets that this sponsor asked for? Don't worry about when they might be held accountable for those widgets actually producing results. Build the widgets. And you find yourself, if you manage to wander around a typical enterprise technology organization, and you ask folks the Christopher Wren question. Is everyone familiar with the Christopher Wren question? Christopher Wren was the architect of the rebuild of St. Paul's Cathedral, and he would often wander among the workers asking them, what are you doing? And when he got very low-level questions like, I'm a brick mason and I'm making bricks, he's like, well, okay. And when he finally got to the person that said, I'm building a cathedral to be the most beautiful cathedral in all of England, he knew that he'd gotten through to some. And the Christopher Wren question for all of you, as you're wandering around the folks doing the actual work, you say, hey, what are you helping us accomplish? And when you get the, I'm building an enhanced DPM for the marketing department, like that's the equivalent of I'm making bricks. Well, what are they going to do with the DPM? I don't know. I was just told to build this enhanced DPM because someone convinced everyone that we had to get that capability in order to deliver results. The other pivot that enables more modern financial management is to front load the discussion. Was it, what are the results you're going after? How are you actually going to change the income statement for the better? Just don't talk about the how, talk about the money. Show me your equation, your financial transformation equation. And when you're ready to commit to that outcome, you can then ask me for some money to enable you to accomplish that outcome. And then we can talk about the capabilities that you need, because I'm trying to instill in you, you probably don't know. And if you act like you know, you're going to go build a bunch of capabilities, but my experience is those capabilities are not going to turn into results. So I want to front load the conversation about results. The promise of this transformation is actually pretty magical. You can get both effectiveness, working on the right things, getting actual results, moving from one in, one out, or one in, one half out, to half in, 2x out, that Steve described, and Steve and Gene Kim write a lot about extensively in Wiring the Winning Organization. And it turns out it's all about the stuff we're talking about now. It's all about rewiring the way people talk to each other. You get collateral enhancement. You get teams that are in that code, and they're like, I know we set out to do this, but I'm right next to this thing that's actively on fire. And I no longer have a policeman telling me, no, I'm not funded to put that fire out. I actually put that fire out. You start getting people enlisted in building the cathedral instead of executing tasks, because they're more affiliated with results than widgets. So part of the half in, 2x out is good people do more than is expected of them because they see other problems that can be solved in the normal course of their work. And the enterprise that you're working for starts getting actual returns on investments, and in general, those investments are smaller. When each participant in the pageant builds their own trailer and axles and does their own maintenance, it's often 20 or 30 times more expensive than one dedicated team doing that. And so you change this cycle for just 2 or 3 cycles from projects to product, transforming the way that you think about finance, and you start to see a meaningful fraction of that input gets to decrease and output starts to increase. But this is challenging. This is challenging on a metaphysical level, and I'm going to come back to that. That's why I'm trying to rehab Aristotle. That's why I introduced Rousseau. That's why we're going to close by talking about Plato. But you drop from the metaphysical level to just the, like, what goes on day to day at work. Well, nobody starts with a clean sheet. The first class of challenge is the cold start challenge. The first time you do this, everybody's got their own trailer and wheels. The first time you do this, you've got 29 pricing systems. The first time you do this, you've got 16 ways to identify a citizen of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So what do? You persuade the persuadable at the top that you actually have to have a launch budget. You actually have to apply additional resources to equip the initial round of product teams. When we first did this in 2015 at Home Depot, we took an additional 25% of the core new systems budget and set it aside as dedicated funding to make progress on common architecture. And I'm pretty sure they still do that. Because that was the right judo move to say, we're not going to disenfranchise all of the winners of the project pageant. And Parker mentioned earlier today, one of the reasons people don't want to do this is they think they lose. So we made it not a lose. They didn't get anything taken away to fund the new construction of the trailer and axle program. Get top-level sponsorship, which is actually easier than you might imagine, because the folks at the top increasingly understand they keep spending more and more on technology, and their company's ROI keeps going down. And those two things are very directly related. They want to fix that. This helps them fix that. And then finally, as we've talked about a lot, and I think this is even more crucially important now, show results. Find ways to very early and very often show that the inputs are going down and the outputs are going up. That's the cold start problem. The second problem is eventually you'll start to get to the point where, hey, the trailer can't really get any better. That dedicated team that's the trailer team, I don't know, should we keep funding them? And you start to get that kind of questioning everywhere, especially when a new bandit at the top shows up and says, hey, we should really be skeptical about this stuff that's been going on for several years because I've got this new idea, and if we invest in this and take stuff away from them, you'll enjoy the float parade next year even more. The way to deal with steady state is to make sure we don't hide all the stuff that happens all the time. Right? Maybe we can't make the trailers any better, but we're using them a lot more. So they need a lot more maintenance. There are pressures from people, the new people who show up, and these questions of, is the product still worth it? So how mechanically do you do this? What are the things that you all do to help the finance organization be your allies in this transformation? Well, give common updates, and Siobhan McFeeney at Kohl's has done this in a masterful way. The project world, they love, like these are the dominant hierarchical people, and one of the strategies of folks in a dominant hierarchy is to divide and conquer. And one of the best ways to divide and conquer among technology folks is to say, I want to talk about my needs in isolation. I know you've got other people who have needs of you, but I don't want to go to those meetings. I want to give you my priority list, and you may get 7 other priority lists, but it's your job to harmonize those. Some have experienced this. This is a fabulous bandit technique, right? Fabulous bandit technique is the problems that are going to cause you harm are your problems. The way to fix that is don't allow private updates. So force every user of the float trailer department to come to the same monthly update. And in pricing, for example, everyone always has needs of the pricing system. Force one monthly pricing update and have the bandits battle with each other, not with the intermediary. This requires a little bit of backbone, and we'll get to courage in just a minute. We'll close with courage. But it requires that you're willing to actually live comfortably with silent tension when it becomes obvious in a monthly update that the marketing department wants something that's fundamentally at odds with the sales department. And they're trying to not have to resolve that themselves. They're trying to make that a technology problem. It's not a technology problem. It's marketing and sales haven't figured out how to subordinate their own needs to the realities of the company. The mechanic for dealing with that is get rid of the spaces where they can make it your problem and make spaces where they need to fight with each other. Live with your actual end users. The truth is always in the actual use of the software. And when you start living with your end users, you not only start developing a better affinity for them mechanically, they start seeing you more as an agent of collaboration than of hierarchy. You will find that all of your end users also feel like they've just had stuff inflicted on them for years and years and years. They very rarely participated in assembling the float at the project pageant. They received the results of the project some years hence, and they largely hated it. In most large organizations, you find at the real end user level, they're basically finding ways to work around the systems that have been inflicted on them. You can then very easily become the people that they actually want to talk to. When that happens, you can enlist them in helping force meaningful measurement. And meaningful measurement is, okay, sales won the battle with marketing, and so we're going to build their thing, but we're still kind of skeptical that they actually have any idea how this is going to work. So we're going to measure it. We're going to measure, does anybody actually use it? When they use it, does it have any follow-through effect to fundamental financials? And we're not going to allow the sponsor of the feature to self-evaluate, because what they'll claim is, yes, I got my feature, give me an A. It's like, okay, well, no, did it actually do anything? And in reality, I recognize that while these mechanics sound straightforward, they're hard. And they're hard because, zooming back up to the metaphysical, we are caught in this several millennia long tension between dominance and hierarchy and collaboration and freedom. And so far today, we've characterized the task of taking this tension on and advocating for the freedom side of the ledger, for the collaboration side of the lever. We've characterized that as a Sisyphean task. And Sisyphus, for those of you who don't know, was cursed by a god to continually roll a boulder uphill only to have it roll down, and that's his permanent condition. I forget who he pissed off, but you know, in Greek mythology, you piss off a god, there's very rarely redemption. There's permanent punishment. It's, you know, in its own way, the myths of old are hierarchy reinforcers, not advocates for better outcomes. So I want to replace this as a Sisyphean task with a much more noble task. And it's the task that Plato describes in Book 7 of the Republic. Essentially a contemporary of Aristotle, Plato tried to give us advice on how to structure a society. And a society can be your company. A society can, of course, be the overall society. And Plato recognized, and by Book 7, we're pretty deep into his idealized view of how might we live together better and how might we conduct ourselves to actually be living the kinds of lives that would result in more of us being fulfilled. And Plato uses an allegory of a cave. This is a 2-hour talk that I'm now going to condense into 1 minute. So go read it if you haven't already read it, or read the Wikipedia part of it. But Plato very accurately describes what happens in any group of people, in any mini society, where the folks are kind of caught up in the old ways. They're actually very deeply attached to the old ways. They have become expert in talking about the old ways. They have become masters of the existing system. And inevitably, someone will become a little bit aware that there's something outside of the current context that feels a little bit more true, that feels a little bit more inspirational. So I think almost all of you have had a version of this experience where you were stuck in hierarchy, and then maybe you did a project at Pivotal Labs, or maybe you met someone who knew how to conduct business in a more iterative way, and you realized, like Frank Costanza realized when he launched Festivus, that there is a better way. You have, in Plato's words, actually Socrates' words, because Socrates is the character that Plato uses to get this message across, you have become a little bit more enlightened. You've become a little bit closer to the sun. And in the allegory of the cave, Plato describes this not as a Sisyphean task, but he recognizes the reality that when you become a little bit more enlightened, but you have to go back to the people who have no enlightenment, and you have to try to explain to them that there is a better way, they will do all of the things that Plato describes. They'll call you an idiot. They will cast you out of the old society because you can no longer compete in the using the language of the old society because you've adopted this crazy new thing. But Plato actually insists that we have to take, as leaders, we have to take people who have more enlightened knowledge. We have to force them to go back into those who are enshackled by the chains of the old ways, and force them to help bring others out of that subjugation. Thomas Jefferson, who, you know, I like to think about now because I wish he were around, he read all these cats. In the Library of Congress is Thomas Jefferson's personal copy of Aristotle's Ethics in Greek. His marginal notes in Thomas Jefferson's own hand are in Greek. He was reading this contemporaneous with writing the Declaration of Independence. Rousseau was a contemporary. Rousseau's famous line is, man is born free, but everywhere is in chains. And that Aristotle's observation of this destructive hierarchy is actually a product of our own creation, not a product of nature. So while it might feel Sisyphean, it's actually much more enlightening, though still painful, to become better at your craft, and by becoming better at your craft, learn better ways that are not the old ways, but they're the new ways. And go back to try and bring a couple more people out of the subjugation of the old ways and into the new ways. And I know from my discussions with now more than hundreds, thousands of people who've actually had the experience of really shifting from the old ways to the new ways, that it has in fact changed their lives in a more positive way. And even when they find themselves temporarily subjugated because a new boss showed up, or they ended up in a new company, or the forces around us just kind of elevated the dominant hierarchical folks temporarily, they still have that kernel of, but I know what better looks like. And I'm gonna suck it up, and I'm gonna fight for it. And I hope you all can reposition the task that's in front of all of us as leaders. We're not destined for the stone to continue to roll down the hill. If you want to just come to grips with that and you feel good about, okay, but I get to pick the hill, do that. Like whatever works for you. But I think there's actually even more inspiration than being able to choose your own hill. You can choose your own hill, and you can get more people to help you in getting the rock to get to a better permanent place. So thank you for your attention. It is the greatest gift you can give to anyone. I hope you'll all go explore some Aristotle, some Rousseau, some Plato, and while doing that, talk to your finance people about changing from the old ways to the new ways. Thanks.